Hey, James Mulvaney here, back with another video. Now, if you've just launched your radio station, or maybe you've had a radio station for some time, and you don't feel like you're maximizing your reach, you're not getting as many listeners as you want, you don't find you're getting as much traction as you want in your genre or niche. Well, if that's you and you want to find out how you can grow your presence online and attract a wider audience, stay tuned for today's video because it's exactly what you need. Hey, so welcome along. My name is James Mulvaney. I am founder of Radio.co, and I've been working with radio stations for the past 15 years and helping entrepreneurs get their stations up and running and really get results. So in today's video, I wanted to talk specifically about discoverability and making sure that your radio station is as accessible as possible and you start really growing that all-important audience and getting those repeat listeners in, because that's the key to building a successful radio station. So today I'm going to give you 5 simple strategies which will help you in the area of discoverability. If you like videos like this, by the way, remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications. You know the drill. So yeah, hit that subscribe button. Okay, so thing number 1, this is possibly the most important part of running a radio station. It is your website. It's your digital presence, and ultimately it's your home on the internet. Now here is what you shouldn't do to begin with. I see a lot of radio stations start up and they'll simply have 1 or 2 pages, perhaps a homepage and like a contact page, and they'll have a player embedded on the homepage and kind of some generic blurb about what the station plays. That's totally horrible from a user's experience point of view. And Google, believe it or not, these days actually takes that into consideration. So immediately, if you just have a website with very little information on, just a big gigantic player in the middle and nothing really beyond that, doesn't give Google any context, it doesn't give your users any context, Google will actually mark you down and will refer you or rank you lower for having a website that effectively is not really very good. So the first thing you need to do is map out your site structure. Think about the different kinds of pages and sections that you want to have on your website. So yes, of course, your homepage should be clear. It should pull the user in. It should entice them to listen to your radio station. I would have a listen button on every single page of your website. I would have a gigantic listen-in button on the homepage, what is known as a hero, which is effectively like the thing at the top you see with a big heading text saying, and telling the user why to listen, you know? So rather than just having your station logo, you want to say, we play the best classic rock, for example. That's going to be the example you're going to be using here, including, you know, hits from the 60s, the 70s, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, whatever, okay? Give Google and give your users some context as to the kind of content that you're actually going to be playing beyond, here's our station name, aren't we great? Here's our tagline, okay? You need to be giving your users context. When I say have multiple pages, you need to really have a content strategy in place. And I'm going to get onto that in a little bit when I start talking about social and content strategy. But what I'm saying is you can't just rely on, as I say, a couple of pages. Think about profiles for your staff or your DJs. Think about stuff that's going on, events that you're holding. Think about putting regular uploads of content, blog posts, reviews on albums or reviews on gigs and events. Think about different things, different kinds of content that you can create top 10 lists to pull listeners in and ultimately start ranking those pages on keywords that people are looking for. As I say, I'm going to hold off kind of going into too much detail. I'll give you some great examples of what sorts of content you can do. But what I'm saying is, start with your website, start with your user experience. It can't be average. If you want to succeed, you need to make sure, and believe it or not, it's going to take time and you've got to put a lot of work into this. Okay, nothing comes easy. You can't just throw up a one-page website and just expect suddenly, boom, you're going to get, you know, thousands of people listening to your radio station. It don't work like that, unfortunately. Hate to say it. You're going to actually have to spend some time really crafting a website that's got a good experience and start putting some thought into exactly the kinds of audience that you want to attract to your site. So that is the first step into making your station discoverable. Okay, so the second step on our action plan today is add your station to as many internet radio directories as possible. There's a few key reasons to do this. Number 1, it generates traffic to your stream directly. Sometimes people are actually looking on directories for specific types of music to listen to. Let's say in our example, we're using classic rock. People might be going into radio directories and looking at the classic rock category to find stations that sound appealing to them. The other reason is it will generate backlinks to your website. This kind of goes back to the first point in terms of user experience and making sure your website's good. In order to start ranking on Google, you actually need to make sure you've got links coming back to your website, and by submitting to different directories, it's a great way to actually start generating some links back to your website. And finally, it helps you become discoverable on different devices. So for example, quite often things like smart TVs or Wi-Fi sort of powered internet radio, smart speakers, these kinds of Internet of Things type of devices, smart devices that have access to radio directories will pull in that source of information from the directory. So you need to make sure that you're listed on as many as possible. I've done another video specifically talking about directories. In fact, I've put together a list of over 30 different radio directories that you can submit to. I'll put a link to that other video here. I'd say keep watching this because some of the next steps that I'm going to be talking about are kind of more crucial than I think than directories. However, maybe bookmark that video for watching for another time. The third step to making your station discoverable is, and this is something I'm so passionate about, but I see people doing it so wrong time and time again, is social and content strategy. If you do not have a social media and content strategy for your radio station, you are going to fail. Or maybe you're not going to fail, but you're not going to be getting the audience that you could potentially be getting if you really nail this. Now, there are so many examples of stations that get this absolutely right, and I find it incredible that more online radio stations don't model what the big boys are doing. So if you look at, I don't know, Kiss 100 in America, or BBC Radio 1, or Absolute Radio here in the UK, or find stations that are big in your country and that you look up to and think, wow, do you know what, I'd like to be like these guys. Take what they're doing on social media and duplicate it for your own radio station. It's really that simple. So for example, I regularly see Radio X, which is kind of like a rock station here in the UK. They're posting stuff on social media. They're posting stuff on their website. For example, like, this album was number 1 10 years ago. Who remembers it? Or they might say, here are the top 10 greatest rock albums of all time. If you post that as a blog post, that is going to generate what is known as organic traffic. Google will pick up on that, and Google loves content like that. So if you write regularly about sort of like, here's the top 10 Foo Fighters songs, or, you know, the top 10 classic rock songs might be Beatles, or it might be Rolling Stones, whatever, or top 10 albums of all time. Content like this is super easy to create, okay, because you're passionate about whatever type of music that you're playing already. It doesn't really take long to just curate a list of, top 10 lists, or go back and look at the charts from, 1975 and find out what the top 10 songs were in, July 1975, or whatever it might be that relates to the kind of audience that you're trying to create. And people stumble across this content, and of course those people are music fans. They're looking to listen to classic rock or Rolling Stones or whatever it is that you're playing. If you can use that as a method to drive traffic from Google and from social media to your radio station, those people are the kinds of listeners that you want to attract. This is so simple, but I can't stress how many radio stations I just see completely neglecting this. They're just posting stuff on social media that's just constantly saying, listen to our radio station, listen to our radio. Yeah, of course, people are going to listen. But if you can entice people to your account and you can get people to engage with your content by posting stuff that they're passionate about, of course that's going to generate listeners. Just constantly reminding people to tune in to DJ Doswaz because he's on at 5 p.m. is not really a social media strategy, and it's not going to necessarily generate you more listeners. But if you're saying, check out these great hits, who remembers this song? Instigate that nostalgia, or talk about, if you're playing cutting edge music, this band are up and coming. Get them to retweet you. Make sure you're tagging people, tagging artists, tagging fan accounts on your social media posts. Make sure that if you're posting content on your website, you're also posting that to social media. It's about creating this critical mass of interesting stuff that's relevant to the audience that you want to attract to your radio station. And it is really that simple. I'm going to be putting together a course on this in the near future, which will go into super detail and give you some kind of cheat sheets and some examples of exactly how you can implement this strategy and how I see the big radio stations really killing it by doing this. But you can go out and do your own research, just look at what other stations are doing and just try and basically take some of their ideas and implement them into your own strategy. It's not necessarily copying and pasting or stealing their ideas, but you're actually just modeling what they're doing and putting it into your marketing strategy, because ultimately that's what this is all about. You've got to have a marketing strategy for your radio station if you want to succeed and if you want to start growing your audience. Another thing which I see lots of stations don't bother with is email. Okay, so on your website, you want to have a newsletter, you want to have a VIP club or an insiders thing that people can join and they can get access to bonus content, they can get access to updates, what's going on your radio station, maybe competitions, giveaways, and give people a reason to sign up to your email list. But it's really important that you start building that list of email addresses, because those are going to be your avid fans. They are going to be your repeat listeners. They're going to be people who are coming back to your station time and time again, and you need to know who they are. And if you start building an email list, you've got their name, you've got their email, you can even maybe ask them some other questions, find out when their date of birth is and give them a birthday reward. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. And again, I see very few radio stations bothering with this. If you look at any website in the tech startup space, look at my companies, Radio.co, Matchmaker, Podcast.co. Our websites are covered in email capture forms. That's because we want to build that relationship with potential customers or people who are interested in the services that we are providing. And it's exactly the same when you're building a radio station. Make sure you start building that email list. On air, you can also do text competitions as well. Another great way to start building a list of phone numbers that you can reach out to and remind them to tune in. But again, I see a few stations actually bothering with this. So, it's just another thing that you can do. It's pretty simple to implement. Make sure you're collecting email addresses on your website. Make sure that you're telling people to subscribe to your newsletter on your social media accounts as well. So just finally, on social media and content strategy, it can be quite daunting when you first start thinking, I'm going to have to write posts every single day or once a week or whatever. If you have got other people involved in your radio station, it's a real good idea to actually involve them in this process. So I ran a radio station here in Manchester for a couple of years called MCR Live. We had a whole army of volunteers. Some of these people were actually DJs or presenters who were broadcasting on air, so they were like our on-air talent. And some were simply people who would go out to gigs. They get free tickets because we managed to get them tickets through the events companies, and they'd write reviews and write-ups on these gigs. So sometimes it would be like, this band's just landed in town, they're on for a week, we'd be first in, we'd send one of these volunteers out, they get to go to a gig for free, and they create an article on our website the next day talking about how awesome that gig was. People are keen to get involved in this sort of stuff, so it's not hard to go out there and find people who really want to be involved, and you don't necessarily have to pay them if you're giving them something in return, e.g. access to free events or free concerts or whatever it might be. The other thing to do is just put together a document which contains guidelines for your presenters, for your DJs, basically stating exactly what they need to do. So it might be that every single month, each DJ needs to create you one piece of unique content about the kind of music that they're playing, or a highlights blog post for the shows for that month. Or it could be that you require that they tweet out 5 times on their personal Twitter accounts talking about the radio show or talking about the radio station. Just because you run the radio station doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be solely responsible for creating every single piece of content or every single post on social media. You can get people involved with this, and you can really leverage the community that you're creating as part of your radio station. You even get listeners involved. Sometimes they love to write about stuff. Sometimes they might want to review the latest album that's come out in your market or genre, or they might want to write a piece on nostalgia. So, try and get people involved in social content creation and marketing and blog content creation, because ultimately people are generally very willing to get involved, especially if you can incentivize them in some way. So there's a few things just to finish up on, but social and content strategy, I'd say, is one of the most important things that you can be doing to grow your radio audience and really just build awareness of what you're doing. So next up, I wanted to talk about video streaming. It's a good way to complement your 24-hour broadcast. A lot of the platforms, so for example, Facebook and YouTube, you might run into issues with copyright protection. They have all these algorithms that will detect if you're playing music. So most radio stations that I see really using video streaming effectively on these kinds of platforms, I'm talking Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, etc. They will use it for things like guest interviews. So when they've got someone in the studio who's really interesting, or even they've got someone remote and they're doing a remote interview with someone which so happens to be, because of COVID or whatever, because often nowadays people are not in the studio, they're being interviewed on Zoom or whatever. You can actually stream that live as it's happening. It's another level of engagement. Another thing it's really good for is actually just doing live Q&A with your audience. So getting people involved in stuff. All of these platforms, when you're broadcasting live on the video, they actually have, the ability to comment. So you can see in real time your listeners interacting with you and providing feedback. So, be creative about how you can use this. It's something else that you can add to your repertoire of tools to make more people aware of you. Ultimately as well, when these videos go out, so let's say you do an interview, it's half an hour long, that's now a half an hour piece of content which sits on your YouTube channel, sits on your Facebook page, that people can go and watch again. It's about creating a multi-channel strategy and thinking about how you can take what you're doing on air and also relay that to other platforms as well. Okay, so my final piece of advice today is create partnerships. You don't have to go it alone. And as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about content creation, if you're just running a radio station and it's just you, there are lots of things to do and you only have so many hours of your day. And particularly if you're doing it as maybe to begin with a side project with a view of kind of going full time or turning it into a business, you sometimes have to leverage other people. Now, partnerships can be anything from, perhaps forming alliances with maybe like grassroots artists, so bands that are up and coming, or it could be if you're focusing on the local area, what bands are coming out of your local town or your city, what's the up and coming coolest artists that, and giving them a platform to share their music. We were fantastic about doing this with MCR Live. If you go and check it out, all the videos are still on YouTube. We do some awesome sessions with some up-and-coming artists, some of which are now pretty big and well-known established artists. But, if you can get in there from the early days and, kind of leverage the fact that they're up-and-coming, they are more than often happy to talk about your radio station. They'll share their interviews. If you record them doing a gig or you have them in your studio doing a live session, they will share that with their subscriber base. Their subscriber base are often very, very good listeners for your station as well, because if you're playing them, the chances are they'll like what the other stuff is that you're playing as well. But don't think about just limiting your partnerships to music, or artists, singers, whatever. There's other stuff you can do too. As a radio station, you can go and partner up with local brands. So, for example, we did a live event with a local brewery. I'll put some clips so you can see. It was pretty cool. They had like this big warehouse. We sort of turned it into a like a bar for the evening. We had our DJs and our presenters, our resident DJs going up and doing their thing on the decks. We had lots of beer being sold by them. It was a really cool brand activation. We did another event, which was a museum, and this was in conjunction with Pioneer, who are a manufacturer of electronic equipment. You'll see Pioneer CDJs being used all the time. And we actually had a DJ underneath a huge T-Rex skeleton, which was amazing. Totally cool, right? And it's about just basically forming these alliances and just thinking outside the box. It could even be like going to a food market. Like if you've got street food festival that's happening in your local area, they often will have a DJ at the front. Form a partnership with them, send your DJ along, broadcast live from the actual event itself. Again, you can do this pretty much from anywhere now. If you're using Radio.co, especially, it makes it so easy to broadcast from anywhere to anywhere. All you need to do is bring on a laptop, or we have an iPhone app or an iPad app, so you can even just do it from a phone if you wanted. Just route the output of the decks into your phone and broadcast that out to your radio station. It's great to, you could pull people aside and do live interviews. But think about how you can activate your radio station. What services or what events are happening in the local area? Bars, restaurants, as I say, outdoor things that need music or have music or need entertainment. there are so many ways that you can connect your radio station to other brands, and they'll be more than happy to get you involved. If you're going to be promoting them on air, and they're going to be promoting you in the flesh, for lack of a better phrase, so you're physically at that event, you've got a presence there, you get some banners made, people who aren't aware of your radio station suddenly become aware of you. If you're perhaps a very genre-focused radio station, look at festivals, look at gigs that are going on. There are tons and tons of opportunities out there. Doesn't have to necessarily mean you're paying the money to sponsorship. It's about partnerships. It's about saying, how can our two brands sync up, do something together that's going to be mutually beneficial, and in turn will both help us either generate revenue by selling beer or whatever, doing some revenue share, or getting sponsorship in, or it's just simply raising awareness of the radio station by doing these events and by doing these partnerships. We even used to partner up with a convenience store, like a trendy kind of cool hipster local hangout, and we ran a few events in there. We had like 100 people turning up each time, which was awesome, and it was great for them because they had a kind of coffee shop stroke bar, so they sold some beer. We had a space that we could run an event which we didn't have to pay for. It would be good for the listeners because they get to mingle and meet each other, and really, it was a great way of doing a brand activation. So there we go. There are my strategies, which I think if you follow, pretty much guarantee that you're going to be able to build a very successful radio station with a large following. It's about thinking about what sort of music you're playing, how that relates to your audience, and how you can go out and attract more audience who are into the kind of thing that you're trying to do. Go out there and kill it. If you've got any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. And if you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, I'd really appreciate if you give me a big thumbs up. That's it. Bye for now. Hey, I'm James, founder of Radio.co. Before you go anywhere, I've got an interesting question for you. Do you know the difference between a radio station that launches and becomes very successful, gets lots of listeners and does very well, and a radio station that perhaps kind of doesn't launch very well and disappears within a few months, doesn't really get much attention? Well, I've put together a checklist which will illustrate to you in a very simple way the 5 key differences between radio stations that launch, do well, versus radio stations that launch and kind of disappear. You can download your free copy over at radio.co/checklist today. Find out exactly how you can make the most out of your radio station. That's radio.co/checklist. Go and grab your free copy. I'll see you there.